This is Impact with Don Wenner.
Hello everyone, Don Wenner, founder and CEO of DLP Real Estate Capital and the host of the Impact podcast. And I'm excited to present episode 2 of the podcast where we'll take a deep dive into the jobs crisis here in America. Today we have Ofer Sharone and Marianne Wanamaker, both on the Impact podcast. Ofer is the professor of the University of Massachusetts Amherst, where he researches and teaches the topics of career transitions, employment, contemporary American society, and negotiations. Marianne is an associate professor of economics at the University of Tennessee, where her research interests include American economic history, education, demographic, and labor economics. We wanted to get their insights into the effects of unemployment and how we can help fight the jobs crisis here in America. The 3 key takeaways from this episode are the silent crisis within the job crisis, the real effect of automation on the future of employment, and what employers and investors can do to positively impact the job crisis. So let's get into my conversation with Ofer and Marianne. All right, so I'm super excited here to be joined with Marianne Wanamaker and Ofer Sharone. And Marianne, I'm going to have you start us off. Tell us a little about yourself here this morning.
Sure. I'm Marianne Wanamaker. I'm an associate professor of economics at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. I'm also the former chief domestic economist of the White House Council of Economic Advisors, serving from 2017 to 2018.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Super excited to have you here. Can't wait to dig in. And then Ofer Sharone, tell us about yourself.
Sure. Hi, I'm Ofer Sharone. I'm an associate professor at UMass Amherst, professor of sociology. My focus is studying unemployment, particularly looking at older and long-term unemployed folks. I've also founded the Institute of Career Transitions, which helps people get support when they're facing unemployment.
Awesome. Thank you. So I'm going to have you kick us off then, Ofer. So we're in a jobs crisis here in America, but a lot of people associate a lot of that with COVID. But of course, this crisis and these challenges started before this pandemic. We know these issues run, far deeper than what's come from COVID, although it, of course, has accelerated some things. So what do you feel are the primary causes today of long-term unemployment in America?
Right. So long-term unemployment right now, I think, is the silent crisis. We've all been aware, I think, of the kind of top-line unemployment numbers, and we're happy that those are getting better. And it's not in a straight line, but as the economy gets back to normal, I expect overall unemployment will be back where it was. The long-term unemployment is not getting a lot of talk, but we have over 4 million Americans right now. Long-term unemployment means more than 27 weeks. It's the time when people start to get into more serious financial distress, as well as emotional and psychological distress. And I think that the reason we have so many people stuck in long-term unemployment is that there's a lot of stigma to being long-term unemployed, even when it's should be so understandable coming out of a pandemic. We're seeing that the long-term unemployed may be the last ones rehired. And so I have a lot of worry about how long we may be facing this crisis.
And do you believe that they're going to have the hardest time getting rehired because the stigma that you haven't been employed for a while, employers aren't willing to give them a chance?
Historically, that's what we've seen, that as people are getting hired, the long-term unemployed, those rates stay around at high elevated levels for years. That's what happened after the Great Recession. It's also happened in prior recoveries. And there's really no great explanation for it beyond the stigma. There are audit studies where employers are sent essentially identical resumes with same level of experience and skills and education, and the only difference is an employment gap. And we see from who gets invited to interviews that there's a huge penalty, more than 50% penalty, for having that employment gap. So employers are making a lot of assumptions about who is out of work for over 6 months, and those assumptions make it real tough to get back in.
And why do you feel this is such a silent crisis? Why isn't this being talked about? Why isn't this on the radar of many today?
Right. I think the both media and policymakers tend to focus on overall unemployment. So that's the number that gets talked about every month when we release the numbers. Um, the other reason, the thing that's also kind of a silent crisis here, is that the way we measure unemployment is very misleading, right? So if somebody gets a job where they're working just a few hours, earning very low wages, someone with a college degree or even a PhD working at Starbucks, that person is no longer counted as unemployed. So our unemployment numbers seem to suggest things are moving back to normal at a more rapidly than they actually are, and I think that adds to the kind of silent element of it. Plus, we've been very preoccupied with a very real pandemic that's taken up a lot of our attention, understandably, but I think it's time to shift our focus to this rising problem.
So Marianne, I know you have a lot, I'm sure, to add to this. I'm going to phrase bringing you into this conversation that, last month, the labor report said that we added 266,000 jobs here in America in April, which is well below what, many economists predicted. So why do you feel we're falling short of this overall unemployment recovery? And then, certainly welcome you to add any comments to the underemployed comments that Ofer added there, and the long-term unemployed as well.
Yeah, let me say a couple of things. So just to kind of to contribute to what Ofer had just said, I think there are two reasons you might think long-term unemployment is going to be a bigger problem this time around, even bigger problem this time around. One is that the option for automation is much higher now than it was when we did this 12 years ago in our last recession. And so what you're reading right now is employers saying the job pool, the people who are applying to fill my open jobs is not what I wanted. There either aren't enough of them, or maybe it consists mostly of long-term unemployed persons. And so I'm thinking about other options, including automation. The other reason you might think it might be a bigger problem this time around is that there's lots of job switching going on, meaning people are disassociating from their employer and moving to another employer because they don't like their work from home rules, or because they don't want to be in this sector anymore, whatever it is. I anticipate a whole lot of job hopping coming up in the next several months. And so what that means is, for employers, there's going to be somebody they can hire who was only recently released from their previous job or only recently left their previous job. And so it's going to be in some ways even harder to stand out as if you have been unemployed for several months. So in terms of the job counts, where we were the last few months. So the way I've been thinking about this is we're still about 9 million jobs short of where we were when the pandemic started. And we were hoping that our pace of job gains was around 1 million a month, in which case we would be roughly back to where we started beginning of next year. If our job gain pace is only 500,000 jobs a month, then you can do the math, right? That means we're not going to get back to where we started until late 2022. And that doesn't even begin to recover jobs, that we would have had the pandemic not occurred. So that's just to get to baseline. So the difference between adding, 200 or 500,000 jobs a month versus adding 1 million jobs a month, which is what we were hoping for, is really, really substantial.
Wow, great feedback. Lot to unpack there. So I'm going to start when I get into the technology and automation topic here a bit, but first, love to talk. So I run a company called DLP Real Estate Capital, and we have 450 team members. We're hiring 30, 40 people a month, and right now, and we provide help in implementing our operating system we call the Elite Execution System, with lots of other entrepreneurs, small businesses around the country who are all seeming to be in heavy hiring mode. And, we all hear how the service industry, can't find enough workers, and, these restaurants can't staff up. And it just seems everywhere, everybody I talk to in many different industries, certainly the construction industry today, can't find enough labor, and it's driving up, prices and contributing to some of the challenges here with housing. So everywhere you look, it seems that small businesses are struggling to find good people, yet we're hearing these tremendous numbers of people who are unemployed and underemployed. What's the disconnect here with employers needing employees can't find enough good ones, and people finding a hard time finding gainful employment today? I'll open up to whoever wants to jump in first.
Sure. Well, I think one of the things going on with employers saying they can't find workers is we need to look at what kind of wages they're being offered. So we would expect if there's a labor shortage, and I'm sure Marianne can speak about this, to see a real spike in wages, right? It's because demand is exceeding supply. I don't think we've seen that quite yet. And so if people are being offered low wage job, bad conditions, it's understandable that they're hesitant to jump back in, especially if they lost jobs that were much better paying with better conditions. There could also be a mismatch between the kinds of jobs that are available and the kinds of jobs people had, and that could cause some friction and some periods of both a lot of people looking for work and employers looking for workers, and both things could be simultaneously true. I also want to just build a little bit on what Marianne said about automation, because I think there is, particularly in this kind of period of recovery, a concern that automation will play a bigger role. That we always hear about concerns that machines are going to replace jobs, but in fact, companies I think find it hard during good economic times to lay off some of these workers and replace them with machines, because then all the remaining workers' morale takes a big hit. This creates a lot of resentment, right? But when you're in a period of you've let a lot of your workers go and now you're in rehiring mode, you don't face that problem. Like, you can rehire many less workers and have machines do some of the work you used to have workers do. And I think particularly in the post-pandemic period, there's going to be more consumer interest in using self-automated checkout technologies like that require less workers. So I think we really could see a big bump in automation replacing jobs, and as Marianne was talking about.
That's a great topic, and we'll navigate there, and I'm going to come back to here a little bit to the mismatch of employers looking for employees. But let's go with that topic there of automation. So, there's stats out there that say somewhere between 30 to 50% of American jobs are at jeopardy of automation in the next, you hear 10 to 20 years, right? And you mentioned cashiers there, right? I think that's the easiest example I always think of, that at least a few years ago, there were around 3 million cashiers in America, 3 million people, part-time or full-time. And if we all can look ahead and say, hey, in 10 years, there's going to be a lot less cashiers, right? That's like one of the most obvious examples of jobs that are being replaced through automation. So, how do you see, where do you see the opportunity in that comes from automation? I think many people look at it from a fearful standpoint that automation is going to replace lots of jobs, but through automation creates need for new jobs, but different skill sets often. So how do you think the effect of automation is going to have on the current workforce and our future workforce?
I'll just say a couple of things. So one is that when you see estimates about how many jobs could be replaced by automation, what people are essentially doing is looking at a job description and saying, does this require a human to execute this, right? Either because it requires decision making that can't be automated, or because it requires some sort of person-to-person skill or emotional intelligence or something, right? And so then you get these numbers that say, well, all of these jobs are predominantly, that the skills are predominantly things that don't require a human, and therefore we think they're going to be automated. And that's true in some sense. But I think what Ofer was saying earlier is important, because it's also a decision by an employer to automate a job. And that decision is not just about whether this job can be automated, but is it in my business's best interest to do so? And it's intimately related to other employees' morale, as he said earlier. It's also intimately related to the price of labor. So the thing that will drive you to automate faster than anything else is if the price of labor is out of control, or if you think it is going to be out of control and it's going to cause you to raise your prices, you can see a way to undercut your competitor by automating a thing that they don't automate, right? And so that, it is always still kind of a strategic decision by a firm to engage in that. I'll also say that although you gave a great example of a clerk in a grocery store as someone who is easily automated, and you can think of other examples. I, for example, expect to see a lot of automation in hostess staff or wait staff in restaurants as a result of this
Right.
labor shortage. But you can also think about industries that we thought were going to be automated 5 years ago, where automation is nowhere in sight. And so I always think about the truck driver, right? Like if you were listening to the quote unquote experts, you would never go to school to be a truck driver, because we have been saying for years that there aren't going to be any truck drivers in America, and it's imminent, it's coming, right? And it hasn't come. And in fact, truck drivers are in short supply, and you can make a lot of money right now being a truck driver. So, you can't fully predict what's going to happen. It is true that automation will be an increasing part of how we get work done in this country, but it's not as simple as we sometimes make it out to be.
Well said.
I think if I'm a young person thinking ahead and wanting my career not to be automated down the road, I think historically we think in this distinction of physical work versus mental work, with more physical work being replaceable. I think the more relevant distinction now is routinized versus non-routinized kind of work, right? So there can be more work that's more mental, but that is more lends itself to being computerized, right? Things that an algorithm can eventually do. So I would think, whether it's physical or mental labor, I would want a kind of job that's not routine, right? That requires judgment calls, that brings up unpredictable situations all the time. I think that those kind of jobs are going to stick around for a much longer time.
Great topics. Great point. And you both have hit on different components of wages, and one of the things that's going to drive automation is going to be significant growth in the cost of employment. And we haven't yet seen that major incline or inflation in salaries. And another crisis that we're very focused on here at DLP is the affordability of housing crisis in America. And over the past decade, the average cost of housing has gone up over 70%, while incomes have gone up, depending on how you look at it, 4 to 8%. So the topic, and lots of course politicians and people advocate for these minimum wages and higher as a way to offset kind of this challenge, but that can lead then companies to hiring less people, choosing automation. So I know this is not an easy question, but what's your take on what's the solution here? To putting people in people being able to earn enough to support everyday living, but not putting in a situation where employers are then going to be incentivized to employ less and choose automation, or choose to hire one very skilled person versus two or three earlier in their career. How do you think about this challenge of wages here that we face today?
I mean, I would say the only solution to that conundrum that doesn't have trade-offs is higher skilled workers. The only way you get out of this kind of issue without generating the effects you're talking about, that if you just mandate higher wages, you're going to have some employment loss. So how do I avoid that? Well, you can get higher wages also through higher skills. It's a much harder path. It's the path, though, that we've been talking about as a country for decades now. How do we build a more skilled workforce, a more competitive workforce, but also a workforce that's then able to take home more pay? Let me say one kind of macro thing about that, about what you just said about housing prices, which is that the thing that's keeping housing prices from really being a crisis in this country right now is our super low interest rates. Even though the price of houses themselves, owned buildings themselves, have risen substantially in the last several months in particular, for the most part, people are not paying higher mortgages because the interest rate is so low. if we have a situation where inflation starts to creep up, which I think all economists expect that it will, and it creeps up enough that the Fed feels like it has to act and we have to raise interest rates, we've got problems in a bunch of different sectors of the economy. But one place we're really going to have problems is in housing when those mortgage payments go up in accordance with those higher interest rates. Then that question you were asking before is going to become even more important.
So Marianne, I agree 100%. And, we run a large real estate brokerage, one of our businesses, and that's one of the big things our realtors are selling to clients or talking about is right now, the average cost of home ownership is less than, arguably, depending on how you look at it, in many markets in the country, less than it's been at any point in the past 10, 20 years because of these low interest rates. But that certainly takes into account, 60% of Americans, those who are renting who aren't renters by choice, don't have the option of homeownership, who renting is the only option. The cost of rent in workforce housing in the $700, $800, $900, $1,000 a month sector, rents have actually never gone up more than they've gone up in the last year, right? Since COVID, right? So you look at these big data points that come out from the national associations talking about how rents have been flat or in some cases have gone down. That may be true in certain markets of New York or California or for luxury markets, but for the space we're in, which is workforce housing, where our average rent across our portfolio is $850 a month, we've never seen greater growth in rents than this past year. It's skyrocketed. So that stat I was referencing before is the average rent in America in 2010 was $700. Today, it's almost $1,200, and it's been tremendous. So that's certainly for those who can get qualified or make sense for homeownership. It's what's kept us, I think, from becoming even more of a renter society that many expected to happen over the last decade as more and more people started choosing rentership over homeownership. But how do we deal with the cost of living for the average renter in America? Is where we see the biggest challenge today, that over half of Americans spend more than 30% of their income on rent, and over a quarter spend more than half of their income on their rent, their gross income. So that's a problem we see in many small markets around the country, especially in secondary and tertiary markets around the country today.
Yeah, and I don't have a solution for you necessarily, but I do want to say that I don't think you should anticipate that those rents are going to go back to normal, quote unquote. I mean, one of the things that drives higher rental prices is the opportunity cost of holding these buildings, right? And so if the housing market is really running hot and you can sell a housing unit for a lot of money, then you're also going to charge a lot more money in rent. So it's responding to these housing prices. And the housing prices, again, I don't have a crystal ball, but I don't anticipate that housing prices are going to, in any sense, revert back to a normal price. People, when they buy a house, whatever they bought it for, when they sell it 4 or 5 years later, they're not going to sell it for less. I mean, it's just not the way it works. And so you should expect those housing prices to remain elevated, and therefore I think for these rental prices to be elevated.
I would just add that, ultimately, if we're looking at housing prices, we need to look at the supply. And the thing that's really limiting the supply are regulations, like zoning regulations. In lots of areas, we have regulations that require only single-family residence, right? You're not allowed to have a developer come in and build an apartment building. That would, significantly increase the supply of housing. So I think this is one of those political issues that's kind of under the radar as well, is more local zoning ordinances. The effect those are having on housing prices is, I believe, significant, and yet it's really an issue that doesn't get enough political attention.
I second that.
Well said. So I'm gonna maybe say a little bit of a consider controversial kind of comment about the challenge of people finding jobs today. Quick kind of story. My sister was a dental hygienist, and she was looking for a dental hygienist job a couple years ago, and kept saying she couldn't find a job. Right? She kept sending her resume out on Indeed like everybody else, and just kept saying she couldn't find a job. And months went by and hadn't found a job. And I don't know for sure if she would have followed into long-term unemployment kind of category, but it had been many months that she hadn't been able to find a job, and she had very little experience, and now had been out of work for a while. She had a baby, and so I told her, my sister's name is Amanda. I said, Amanda, you can find a job very quickly if you're willing to put forth the work. And I told her, print out your resume, put it in a nice folder, and go drive and walk into the dental offices around your market, and you will have a job. It only took her the first office she walked into that she had a job, right? And I can talk for many employers that even if they do the work of putting the job on Indeed, they don't have time because they're so busy and understaffed to review these resumes. And I'll post a job and get 100 resumes in a day or hundreds in days. That when somebody actually goes above and beyond, and even walking into, might seem so crazy today, but walking into our office, I've only had in all my years about 5 people who've ever walked into one of our offices with a resume in their hand. I've only had a few dozen people who've ever taken time to send something even in the mail, a written letter and their resume attached. So how much of people not being able to find a job is simply a lack of willingness or effort, and that may be part of the problem of the kind of education or of knowing to do these things or thinking to do these things, but how much of this is just an effort or just not willing to do the type of work that's available today because of subsidies and different things. That just there isn't a motivation today to need to work for some. How much of this unemployment is just a lack of effort, and in short, whether we're talking all unemployment or the underemployed or long-term unemployed segments of the market.
So I can say a little bit about that. Look, I think the vast majority of people, I've talked to hundreds of people in my research, start out with a lot of effort. So it's the rare exception that someone says, hey, I'm just going to try to live on unemployment compensation, right? That unemployment compensation usually does not cover your expenses. And either way, it's going to end at some point, and then where are you going to be? Most people really do want to get a job. They enjoy their jobs. They get a lot of meaning out of it. And of course, financial security. Now, the thing that happens is over time, like you're spending months and months, in some cases more than a year, and your experience is of hearing no, 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 right? Rejection after rejection after rejection. Now, we're human beings. Like we don't react like that as a machine would. Like we start to lose some of our confidence. We start to have emotional, psychological repercussions from a string of rejections. So yes, it's true that as as the story of Amanda points out, that if you are able to continue at a very sustained effort with networking, with reaching out to people, with being very proactive, that is going to increase your chances. There's no question. With the people that I study, uh, over half of them, when they eventually do get jobs, it's because of activating a network contact. Um, but networking is a lot easier to say than to actually do, especially after you've been out of work, say 6 months or longer, right? So we can say network, network, network. But the reality is, what networking requires is really difficult things. Like you have to project confidence at a moment when you're feeling the very opposite of confident, right? You've just had 6 months of being told no. You have to appear, you know, you're feeling really desperate, but you can't appear desperate. We have to be really able to communicate in a very professional way your skills and not convey that you're, at this point, terrified of not being able to pay the rent. Those are really difficult things to do. And, you know, even though it would help, a lot of people find it over time more and more difficult to do for understandable reasons, I think.
Yeah, let me just add a little bit to that, which is to say, I think, that this time is different in many different ways. But one of the ways that I've been thinking about our current unemployment insurance benefits is that it's not really unemployment insurance as much as it is uncertainty insurance. And for people right now looking for a job, it's not just a question of, do I want to work for this employer or not? It's also a question of, have I put together the childcare situation that's going to allow me to work for this employer? Is this employer going to have the right public health rules in place so that I feel safe? Am I going to end up having to work from home? How do I feel about that? So there's a lot of other stuff that we normally don't concern ourselves with. We're thinking about a job application that now is super relevant. And so one of the things that unemployment insurance is doing is it's allowing people to bridge to a time when they're more certain about those things. They better understand what their childcare situation is. They better understand what the path of the virus is going to be, what our fall might look like, what the rules of the employer are going to be, what the rules of their local governments might be. And so, I'm not suggesting that people aren't putting forth the effort, but one of the things unemployment insurance does is it says it's okay if you don't put forward all the effort right this second, because we're going to hold you through this financially until things are a little bit clearer, right? So I think in study after study, you have seen that unemployment insurance benefits, the more generous they are, the longer it takes workers to find a job. That may be totally fine. It may be exactly what we want from a public policy perspective, but it does sort of facilitate that slowdown to some extent.
Great points, Marianne. And I'm going to jump into something there in a moment, but I want to make one more comment on this topic. But we are constantly hiring. We are adding our organization 7 to 10 people weekly into the company, and so we're putting lots of people into what we call screening, where we're evaluating them. The resume comes across, and we evaluate them. We ask people to do some we think to be basic things, but are certainly more than most employers. We ask them to complete a behavioral assessment, which takes about 5 minutes. We ask them to complete a cognitive assessment, which takes 12 minutes exactly. We ask them to complete a video interview of themselves, which, depending on how long they choose to take, can take 10 to 20 minutes. But those basic, 3 steps, which are half hour, 45 minutes of investment of time, we find somewhere in the neighborhood of 2/3 to 3/4 of people, when we send them and call them and say, hey, great news, we're interested in talking to you about coming to work here. We need you to complete these steps. 2/3 out of 3/4 of people never complete the steps. And often cases, they're coming back and not realizing they're applying to us again 2 months later, 4 months later, 6 months later, and still haven't been, it's not like that they had other opportunities. So that's why they didn't complete. They're still out looking for work, but they didn't want to have to invest an hour of time, in order to get a job. So I do sometimes challenge that thinking that it's a lack of effort. I get a lot of the points you made there, Ofer, that it can be challenging, but we seems that in this environment that many people just don't want to do. They feel that's too much work. And we get some people who literally say that, I just didn't want to go through having to complete those assessments, right? I don't like doing assessments, right? I don't like being on video, right? So certain uncomfort or unwilling to spend time on something, it keeps people from taking steps forward. And we've seen that not just here since COVID, but this has been the case for the last 15 years, that we've had these challenges in multiple different cycles. Open up if anyone wants to add to that, but then I'd love to switch gears to what can we do as employers to kind of Marianne talk that people are maybe not wanting to come work because we have too rigid of a work from home policy or different things that we could do that would make things more flexible to people. I want to get into that next, but let's first love either of you have any further comments on the kind of topic of people willing to do the work to get into the workforce first, that being part of a contributing challenge there.
I think one of the things you're facing here as an employer during hiring is that it's become a lot easier to just apply for a job. Uh, the barrier to applying, as compared to, maybe 20, 30 years ago when you had to go buy a newspaper and send in something by mail. Now it's a few clicks. So you don't have that filter of, are you necessarily a serious job seeker? Are you someone during their lunch break, at their current job, or maybe even, living in some remote other place, just applying, not really seriously thinking about who they're applying to, and then waiting to see the response, and then giving it okay, let me look a little more closely. What is this company? Am I actually interested? I think the population of people who are long-term unemployed, who are, seriously wanting a job, there was no question that they would take the half hour it takes, if they thought this was a potentially good fit for them, right? But I do think you're getting a lot of other people applying who are not necessarily, haven't yet filtered out which jobs they're serious about and which ones they're just doing it because it's a few clicks.
It's a fair point.
Or they may be like me, and after a year of COVID, they know they can't pass your cognitive test, so they're so they're just bailing early. No, but I do, in seriousness, I do think there's also probably some amount of fit, in that they're learning something about you as an employer that they're not sure that they're not sure that they would jive with, and so in some ways they're not wasting your time, which is maybe a good thing.
Yeah, fair point. So to kind of pivot here, so we have two main groups of listeners who listen in here to the podcast, and certainly doesn't describe everybody, but we have small business owners who are scaling entrepreneurial organizations, and we have investors, those passive investors, high net worth, wealthier families here. And so I'm going to kind of ask two related questions. Then I'm going to tell the first one is from the standpoint of small business owners. What can we be doing, to help with this jobs crisis? What should we be thinking about differently that could help ourselves and scaling our companies, finding the right people? Because we're all such in search for the right people for organizations. People can help us achieve our goals and deliver our products. What should we be thinking about differently to make an impact with this jobs crisis today in America?
I would say this to any employer, including small businesses, to consider assumptions that go into your filtering process. You're getting a lot of resumes, but when you're deciding who am I going to follow up with, who am I going to invite for an interview, to just have like a little critical distance towards maybe what would be some default assumptions you make about. So I would particularly point to age as something that tends to come with a lot of assumptions that older workers are facing barriers, um, and myths that are often not true, that they're not going to stick around for a while. It's actually, older workers are more likely to stick around than younger workers who are more job hopping and looking for one job as a way to build towards their next job. So I would look at assumptions around age. I would also really look at assumptions around someone who is, obviously unemployed, but also someone who's overqualified. I think this is something that doesn't get enough talk, but is a real barrier that employers tend to dismiss anyone who has previously held a job that it's a higher level than the one they're currently applying to. There are lots of reasons why workers, as they go through their career, are actually interested in making a shift that could look like taking a job that they could have done 10 years earlier. It doesn't mean that they're going to leave as soon as they find a new opportunity, a better opportunity, which is what I hear a lot of employers assume. So I think if questioning these assumptions would be a great way to start on making a difference in giving opportunities.
Great feedback. There's a great new book that just came out, maybe you've read, called Think Again by Adam Grant.
Yes.
This made me just think of there with questioning our assumptions. So great feedback there.
So Ofer gave you a way of thinking about how to, better assess the candidates who are coming in the door. And so I'll give you an idea about how to better market yourself to candidates. So one of the things I'm hearing from employers right now is that potential employees want to know how they dealt with their labor during the crisis. Who did you lay off? How many people did you lay off? Did people work from home? They want to hear the history of how that went down. And so a friend of mine owns a few restaurants, and he said one of the easiest or the best things he's been doing is saying to people when they come in for an interview is, I want you to know I didn't lay anybody off in COVID. This is what we did instead. And he starts there. And then he says he has really great conversations with people because they understand that working for him doesn't carry the same level of sort of precariousness as it would to work for somebody else in the same industry. And people are really risk averse right now because of everything we've just been through. So anything you can do to communicate to people, this is how we dealt with the crisis, this is our decision making process, and this is how we try to minimize the impact on our employees, I think would be quite fruitful.
Excellent feedback. So I'm going to ask the last question, which I kind of alluded to before. We have a lot of wealthy individuals who've worked hard and now are looking to make an impact with their wealth, who listen in here, both from a impact investing focus as well as through philanthropy. So for those out there looking to make an impact through their capital, whether that's just through giving or through making impact investments, and what would be your recommendation for those individuals and families to be thinking about?
Look, I think there are a lot of starving nonprofits out there who are doing excellent work in trying to support people in the labor force, or people trying to re-enter the labor force. There are organizations aimed at all kinds of subgroups, like moms who took 10, 15 years to raise kids and now trying to re-enter. They face tremendous barriers that are in some ways similar to someone who's been long-term unemployed, in some other ways different. But veterans is another group, and veterans actually, they're getting decent funding from the government. So if I'm a philanthropist, I would look at more under the radar groups, the long-term unemployed, of course, people who were recently released from incarceration face tremendous barriers. So I would look for these nonprofits that are really on the ground, working with people, as individuals, forming, providing coaching, counseling, maybe small support groups. Those I've seen make a world of difference. One of the things that really happens to long-term unemployed job seekers is you start to internalize the rejection and the stigma, as I talked about. And what really helps a lot is to be with others in the same boat, who can, help you recognize it's not just you. There are structural barriers. There are barriers that are in the economy, in employers. There's nothing wrong with you. And so you can maintain that confidence and then walk around like your sister and give out your resume with confidence to different dental offices. So that, I think, would be a great way to invest some philanthropic money.
Excellent. Thank you. Marianne, any comments here?
Yeah, I kind of thinking like on the for-profit side, right? So how do I spend my money in a way that I feel better about, or invest my money in a way that I feel better about? And so, I think if it were me, I think right now I'd be asking a lot of questions about hiring and training practices. So Ofer gave some examples earlier about how you can kind of rethink your hiring, but there's actually tons of information and literature about this right now. So do you have a skills-based hiring program in place, or are you still hiring on educational degrees? Do you have an anti-bias operation in your human resources division? Are you thinking about these issues? Are you expecting candidates to show up for an interview between 9 and 5? We now understand that sort of policy really limits the kind of candidates you're going to get, or the diversity of those candidates. And then what are you doing once you've hired people? What are you doing about training and skill upgrading? How is it that people can stay in this organization but really develop their careers? And some of America's biggest companies are thinking really hard about this and are doing a lot on this. And so I think that those are the sort of questions if I care about the labor market and I care about employment and I care about, kind of the less fortunate among us, those are the questions I would be asking.
Excellent. Great feedback. Well, this has been excellent here. I'm going to leave it to each of you for closing comments here. And if you'd like, if there's if you want to highlight any way listeners can get in touch with you as well, or any other insight you'd like to provide, Marianne, why don't you start us off? And appreciate the incredible insights from both of you here today.
Yeah, I'll just say, let me just wrap up by saying that that we're fortunate to live in a country with just really outstanding employment opportunities. And that felt more true a year and a half ago than it does right now. And I'm anxious for the day when we get back to that. You can always find me on Twitter. I'm at Wanamaker, MWANAMAK.
Awesome. Thank you.
And well, I'll just end by saying this has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you. People can find me by Googling Ofer Sharone. You'll see my UMass webpage with some articles I've written. I once in a while am on Twitter at Sharone Ofer. And I would say this, look, things may feel increasingly like they're getting back to normal. I certainly hope so. I think we're on our way. But let's not take the eye off the ball in terms of the people that may be left behind, and currently is over 4 million of them. Let's make sure we get everybody across the line here.
Well, great feedback. I think everybody listening will probably be surprised to hear that none of us had ever spoken before we jumped on here, because it certainly sounds like certainly both of you have known each other a long time here. As it's been an excellent conversation. Thank you for your great insights. I know many taken away some nuggets and some things to take some action here and rethink. So thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you, Marianne and Ofer, for your time here today. This has been Don Wenner on the Impact Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode. You can check out the rest of our episodes by subscribing wherever you get your podcast or on YouTube. I encourage and challenge you to make an impact.